Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into really the incredible story of King Solomon. One of history's most compelling figures. Wisdom, riches, that famous temple, just iconic. But there's so much more beneath the surface, isn't there? It's not just the grand biblical story.
Not at all. It's full of these amazing details, archaeological finds that keep popping up, and constant debate about where history ends and legend picks up.
Exactly. And we've pulled together a whole stack of research, deep dives into the temple's construction, archaeological reports, historical critiques, even theological takes on his life.
Right. And our goal today is really to unpack all of that. We want to look at the different views on Solomon's reign, pull out the key bits of knowledge. So by the end, you have a really solid understanding of this figure who's, well, fascinated by people for literally thousands of years.
Okay, let's dive right in. The beginning. Solomon, son of David and Bathsheba. How did he actually get the throne? It sounds like there was quite a bit of family drama.
Oh, absolutely. He was David's second son with Bathsheba, also called Jedediah, beloved of the Lord. But David had plenty of older sons, and there was a real power struggle, especially with his half-brother Adonijah.
Ah, right.
But Bathsheba and the prophet Nathan, they really maneuvered to secure Solomon's place. He was probably quite young when he was crowned, maybe 18 at the most.
18. And then David dies. That must have been a precarious position. How did he solidify his rule so quickly?
He moved fast, decisively. The sources say he eliminated rivals. People like Adonijah, his own brother, and Joab, David's longtime general. He didn't hesitate.
Sounds pretty ruthless for a teenager.
Well, maybe necessary. His reign lasted about 40 years, usually dated around 970 to 931 BCE. And this period, it's often called Israel's Golden Age. The kingdom was huge, maybe 128,000 square kilometers.
Wow. And this is when we get to that famous wisdom, right? The divine gift. Tell us about that story.
Right, early on, at Gibeon, God appears to Solomon in a dream, offers him anything, and instead of asking for, long life or riches or victory.
The usual king stuff.
Exactly. He asks for an understanding heart to govern his people prudently. Basically, wisdom to rule well.
And God was pleased with that.
Very pleased, apparently. Granted him not just incredible wisdom, but also promised riches and honor because he hadn't asked for them.
And that wisdom got tested almost immediately, didn't it? The famous story, the judgment of Solomon.
That's the classic example. The two women, the baby, his solution, proposing to cut the baby in half.
Seems brutal, but it worked.
Perfectly. It revealed the true mother's compassion. Just brilliant discernment really cemented his reputation early on.
And that reputation spread. People came from all over.
They did. Kings, scholars, people from many nations came just to hear his wisdom. And this fame, it wasn't just abstract. It directly impacted the kingdom's prosperity.
How so? Through administration.
Yes, partly. He set up these administrative districts, very organized, to make sure the royal court was supplied.
And the court needed a lot of supplies, I imagine.
A massive amount. Some estimates suggest they were feeding maybe over 12,000 people every single day.
12,000.
Daily. Yeah, it shows a really strong, centralized government replacing the older tribal ways. And the wealth. It was staggering. Annually, the Bible mentions 666 talents of gold coming in.
Just annually. How much is a talent?
Roughly 75 pounds, or about 34 kilograms, so 666 of those. It's an immense amount of gold every year. And some sources tally up his total accumulated wealth as just unbelievable figures, like 100,000 talents of gold, 1,000,000 talents of silver, billions in today's money, plus brass, iron, precious stones.
So he was living like a true Eastern monarch.
Completely. Surrounded by luxury and grandeur.
Okay, that sets the stage for his most famous project, the temple in Jerusalem. What was the driving force behind that huge undertaking?
Well, the initial idea actually came from his father, David.
Oh, right.
David wanted to build a permanent house for God, but he was told no because he was a man of war, too much blood on his hands. But God promised David his son, Solomon, would build it during a time of peace.
So David did the prep work.
A lot of it. He gathered vast amounts of materials, funds. He laid a lot of the groundwork for Solomon.
So Solomon steps in, inherits this plan. What was the actual construction like? The scale of it?
It was enormous. It started in his 4th year as king, took 7.5 years. The workforce figures are just mind-boggling. 30,000 Israelites sent to Lebanon in shifts, 150,000 Canaanites conscripted as laborers, cutters, carriers.
150,000.
Yes, plus thousands of overseers, 550 chief overseers, 3,300 subordinate ones. It was a national effort and then some, and the whole thing was led by Hiram Abiff.
The master craftsman.
Exactly, an architect, engineer, brilliant with metal, stone, timber, engraving. He was of mixed Tyrian and Israelite background.
And the level of detail. The sources mention how quiet the building site was.
Right. It says the stone was cut perfectly at the quarry, the timber prepared in the forest, so no sound of axe, hammer, or tool of iron was heard at the temple while it was being assembled.
Incredible pre-planning.
Just shows an amazing level of organization and skill.
And the location, Mount Moriah, that site had history already.
Deep history. Traditionally the site where Abraham offered Isaac, and where David later built an altar after a plague. Solomon specifically chose it, landscaped it. It was meant to be visible, glorious, beautiful for the situation, the joy of the whole earth.
Beyond the temple, though, he built other massive things too, like his own palace.
He did. And interestingly, his own palace complex took 13 years to build.
13. That's almost double the time for the temple.
It is. It raises questions, perhaps. This complex was huge. The House of the Forest of Lebanon, the Porch of Pillars, the Hall of the Throne, a house for Pharaoh's daughter.
Pharaoh's daughter, one of his wives.
One of many, yes.
Yeah.
He also built large water systems, fortifications like the Millo. And his building wasn't just in Jerusalem. He rebuilt and fortified key cities across Israel. Hazor, Megiddo, Gezer, strategic administrative centers.
Megiddo, Hazor. Those names ring bells archaeologically.
They definitely do. He also built the port of Ezion-Geber for trade and Palmyra way out in the desert. He was a builder on a grand scale.
Okay, grand scale indeed. But now, the big question. Archaeology. How much of this incredible story, this powerful kingdom, actually shows up in the ground? There's been a lot of debate. Right?
Oh, huge debate. For a long time, you had what are called the minimalists or skeptics. They argued there was basically no physical evidence for a big, powerful, united monarchy in the 10th century BCE. They saw David and Solomon as maybe minor tribal chiefs, if they existed at all.
So the Bible's account was seen as highly exaggerated.
Exactly. Largely legend, created much later. But in recent decades, the archaeological picture has really started to shift.
How so? What finds have changed things?
Well, a major one was the Tel Dan Stele, found in 93. It dates to about 840 BCE, so later, but it clearly mentions the House of David.
House of David, written in stone.
Written in stone by an enemy king boasting of victories against the kingdom of Judah. It confirms David wasn't just some minor figure, he founded a significant dynasty. There are also possible mentions on the Mesha stele and maybe even in Egyptian records from Pharaoh Shoshenqopus.
Shanky comes up later too, doesn't he?
He does. Another challenge was this low chronology idea, basically redating archaeological layers to push major building works later, after Solomon. But that theory has faced a lot of criticism based on pottery analysis, carbon-14 dating. The evidence increasingly points back to significant activity and wealth in the 10th century.
So we see signs of a growing kingdom around that time.
Definitely. Excavations show a clear move from small villages in the earlier Iron Age first to larger planned cities in Iron Age Thrae, the period of David and Solomon. New walls, fortifications that suggest strong central leadership.
Any specific sites that really stand out?
Khirbet Qeiyafa is a great example. It's an Israelite fortress near Philistine Gath. It has this distinctive casemate wall, 2 gates, which is interesting because the Bible mentions a town called Sharim, meaning 2 gates in that area.
Okay.
And there's a large building, maybe a palace or a governor's residence right at the top. It looks like a project directed by a central authority.
And weren't there smaller finds there too? Things that give clues about daily life or administration?
Yes. Things like mass-produced pottery jars with finger impressions on the handles may be a sign of standardized measures or taxation.
A tax system?
Possibly. And crucially, they found a piece of pottery, an ostracon, with an inscription mentioning a name. Eshbal, son of Beta.
Gishabal. That sounds familiar.
It was Saul's son's name. But in later biblical texts, it's often changed to Ishbosheth, likely to avoid the Baal element.
Right, because Baal became associated with pagan gods.
Exactly. Finding Eshbal in a 10th century context suggests the Bible accurately preserved older naming conventions, even ones that became awkward later. It also implies, a degree of literacy.
Fascinating. What about the Philistines? Goliath's hometown, Gath.
Excavations at Gath, Tel Asafi show it was huge in the time of Saul and David. A really powerful Philistine capital city, massive gates, strong fortifications.
So it matches the biblical picture of a major rival.
It does. And significantly, Gath was destroyed around 830 BCE by Hazael of Aram, which the Bible also records. After that, it shrinks, and later texts only mention 4 main Philistine cities. Gath drops off the list. The archaeology lines up perfectly.
Okay, what about Jerusalem itself? David's palace, Solomon's buildings. That must be hard to excavate.
Incredibly difficult. There's the modern city, centuries of rebuilding, but in the area called the City of David, just south of the Temple Mount, there are some monumental structures. The step stone structure and the large stone structure, the SSS and LSS, they date right around the 1000 BCE, David's time.
And they're big.
Very big. They suggest a powerful entity capable of major construction. Some archaeologists, like Eilat Mazar, argued the LSS was David's palace.
Any other finds there?
Yes, things like fancy column capitals, remains of exotic food suggesting wealth, and boule clay seals belonging to royal officials mentioned later in the Bible. It points to a significant administrative center.
And for Solomon's specific building projects, the cities he fortified.
This is really compelling. Archaeologists have found city gates at Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, the very cities First Kings says Solomon rebuilt.
Oh.
And these gates share a remarkably similar design. A 6-chambered structure, very distinctive and similar dimensions, even a similar gate found in Jerusalem excavations, the Ophel Gate.
All the same design.
Strongly suggesting they were built by the same central administration. It fits Solomon's reign perfectly.
That seems like strong evidence.
It really is. Plus, destruction layers match the story too. Gezer shows destruction before Solomon would have rebuilt it, matching the story of Pharaoh conquering it and giving it to Solomon. And then later destruction at Gezer and Megiddo aligns with Pharaoh Shoshenq's invasion right after Solomon's death. Shoshenq even left a victory inscription at Megiddo.
Wow, the pieces really seem to fit together there. What about the temple itself? We can't excavate the Temple Mount, obviously.
Right, direct evidence is impossible currently, but we can compare the detailed biblical description to other temples found in the region from that era.
And are there matches?
Yes, quite striking ones. The Bible describes a specific layout. A tripartite plan, porch, main hall, inner sanctuary, or Holy of Holies, 2 large pillars at the front. This matches temple designs found in Syria and Canaan from the 2nd and 1st millennia BCE. The temple at Ain Dara in Syria is remarkably similar, even down to details that help clarify tricky phrases in the biblical text, like windows with recessed frames.
So the description fits the architectural style of the time.
Perfectly. Even small finds, like a pottery shrine model from Khirbet Qeiyafa, show features like recessed doorways and roof beams that echo the temple descriptions.
So putting it all together, the archaeology seems to increasingly support a picture of a wealthy, organized, powerful kingdom in the 10th century, with connections across the region.
That's definitely the trend. Things like Solomon's wealth fit the economic picture. The mention of Ophir for gold, an 8th century inscription found later actually says gold of Ophir.
And the Queen of Sheba.
Also plausible now. An inscription found in Jerusalem on a large jar shard dates to the 10th century and mentions ingredients for incense, like labdanum, that came from South Arabia, Sheba's region. It points to that trade connection.
Amazing.
And evidence for relations with neighbors like Phoenicia and Geshura lines. Even Edom, which the Bible says David conquered. Archaeology now shows sophisticated copper mining there, under likely Israelite influence, right around 1000 BCE, supporting the idea of an early Edomite state being subjugated.
So the ground is increasingly telling a story that resonates strongly with the biblical one, pushing back against that earlier skepticism.
Yes, the convergence is becoming harder to ignore.
What's an incredible picture of success, power, wisdom. But the story doesn't end there, does it?
Yeah.
Despite everything, things took a turn for Solomon. What went wrong?
Well, the sources say that after he finished the temple in his palace, God appeared to him again, a second time.
And this time?
It was a warning, a very clear, strong warning. God essentially said, if you or your descendants turn away from me, worship other gods, then this kingdom, this temple, it will all be destroyed and the kingdom torn away.
A direct warning. And Solomon?
He failed to heed it. Spectacularly, you could say. He systematically broke the specific rules laid out for kings back in Deuteronomy 17.
Which were?
Don't multiply horses, especially from Egypt. Don't accumulate huge amounts of gold and silver. And critically, don't multiply wives, lest his heart turn away.
And he definitely broke that last one.
To an astounding degree. The text says 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, 1,000 women.
1,000. It's hard to even comprehend.
And many were from foreign nations that God had specifically warned against intermarrying with, precisely because they would lead Israel's heart away to other gods.
And that's exactly what happened.
Yes. As Solomon got older, it says his foreign wives turned his heart after other gods. He started worshiping Ashtoreth of the Sidonians, Milcom of the Ammonites, Chemosh of Moab.
These are major pagan deities.
Absolutely. And he didn't just worship them privately. He built high places, shrines for these gods, on the hills near Jerusalem, right near the temple he himself had built for God.
That's quite a betrayal. Doing that right into the nose of the temple, it must have sent a terrible message.
A devastating example for the people. The Bible says God became angry because Solomon's heart had turned, despite God appearing to him twice with warnings.
And the consequence was immediate.
Consequence was declared. God would tear the kingdom away from his son, not during Solomon's lifetime for David's sake, but after his death. Only one tribe, Judah, would remain with his dynasty. And alongside the idolatry, there were practical burdens too. The heavy taxes, the forced labor for all his building projects.
That must have caused resentment.
Deep resentment, especially among the northern tribes. He also built up a massive army, huge numbers of chariots and horses, again breaking that Deuteronomic law.
So his glorious reign didn't end so gloriously.
No, it ended on a pretty somber note. He died relatively young, maybe around 55, after reigning 40 years. And the Bible doesn't record any repentance. His last recorded act is trying to kill Jeroboam.
Jeroboam.
The man God had already told would become king of the northern tribes after Solomon's death. Solomon tried to prevent God's judgment.
Wow. And after he died.
The kingdom split, exactly as prophesied. His son Rehoboam took the throne, acted foolishly, and the 10 northern tribes broke away under Jeroboam, forming the separate kingdom of Israel. The united monarchy was finished.
It's such a powerful story. All that wisdom, all that wealth, ending in division and, well, failure in many ways. What are the big lessons people have drawn from this over the centuries?
Well, one huge lesson is that wisdom isn't enough. Solomon had more wisdom than anyone, supposedly, but he lacked obedience. Obedience to God's specific commands was paramount, and he failed that test.
So wisdom without obedience is hollow.
Or even dangerous, perhaps. Another clear lesson is about wealth and power. Solomon had literally everything the world could offer. But it didn't bring lasting satisfaction or security, and you could argue his immense wealth actually contributed to his downfall, enabling his excesses. It's a classic reminder that how you finish is more important than how you start.
A cautionary tale about prosperity.
Definitely. And finally, the impact of relationships. The text is explicit. His foreign wives turned his heart away.
Choose your company wisely.
Exactly. It's a stark illustration of that principle. Evil company corrupts good habits. He yoked himself, you might say, to influences that pulled him away from his foundations.
So beyond the historical figure and the biblical narrative, Solomon has this whole other life and tradition and legend, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He's traditionally credited with writing parts of the Bible, most of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the Song of Songs, maybe a couple of Psalms too. And then there are later texts like the Wisdom of Solomon attributed to him.
And in different religions, how is he viewed?
It varies. In Judaism, he's revered for building the temple, a righteous act, but also criticized for his later sins, the idolatry, and the wives. Christianity generally accepts his historical reality as presented in the Old Testament. Islam sees him very differently as Suleiman, a major prophet of God. Importantly, in Islam, he is seen as never having committed idolatry. His failings are viewed differently. He's also credited with supernatural powers.
Supernatural powers, like what?
Like controlling the wind, commanding jinn or demons, understanding the language of animals. These are prominent themes in Islamic tradition and folklore.
Which leads us into the purely legendary stuff, too.
Right. The legends are wild and widespread. Think of the 1001 Nights. Solomon features there, often commanding demons with his magic ring.
The Seal of Solomon.
That's the one. A signet ring supposedly given to him by God, giving him power over the supernatural. There are stories of him using it to trap demons, build things, even tales of him flying through the air on a magic throne or carpet.
So he becomes this almost mythical figure, a master magician as well as a king.
Exactly. He occupies this fascinating space between detailed history, religious tradition, and fantastical legend.
What an incredible arc we've traced today. King Solomon, from that wise young king receiving God's favor.
Right, to the grand builder of the temple, ruler of a vast, wealthy empire. The archaeology increasingly backing up that picture of power in the 10th century BCE.
Yeah, it's amazing how those discoveries keep adding layers, challenging old assumptions.
It really is. Makes you appreciate how history and archaeology are ongoing conversations.
But then there's that stark turnaround, the cautionary tale. Even the wisest man, blessed with so much, can fall so far.
Ignoring those fundamental warnings, letting desires run unchecked, the consequences were huge. The division of the kingdom he inherited, the very kingdom his father David built. It's a profound lesson.
It really makes you think about that relationship between power, divine blessing, and just, well, human accountability.
Absolutely. And some interpretations see Solomon's kingdom, the peak of Israel's earthly power, as maybe um, a type, a foreshadowing of something greater, a perfect, eternal kingdom still to come, precisely because Solomon's, for all its glory, was flawed and temporary.
That's a fascinating thought. Wait, so reflecting on this whole deep dive, what's the single most striking thing for you about Solomon's journey? From that glorious start to the fractured end, what enduring idea does his story leave you wrestling with?